Hey guys, tonight we're journeying to a place that's rougher than a medieval privy seat and somehow even less comfortable. The world of disability in the Middle Ages. You know how modern life has ramps, accessible bathrooms, and at least one HR department pretending to care? Forget all that. This is an era where if you had a limp, people assumed you were either cursed, blessed, or possibly just really bad at hopscotch. Before you nestle into your ergonomically optimized mattress, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, fire up that fan for white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe swaddle yourself in a blanket for emotional support, because tonight's subject comes with more ups and downs than a medieval staircase. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered how people with disabilities survived before the invention of reasonable accommodations? Did anyone actually use a cane, or was it just a fashion flex? What did you do if you lost a limb? Did you get a job, or just get a nickname? Could you get medieval health insurance, or was it just prayers and leeches? Was there such a thing as a medieval disability benefit? Or did your pension come in the form of a pat on the head and a free trip to the nearest monastery? Would your neighbors help you, pity you, or try to sell you as a miracle? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the Middle Ages. You're in a one-room cottage. Your left leg is not what it used to be. The year is 1362, and someone's already blaming you for last night's rainstorm. Good luck. Your eyes flicker open, and before you even roll over, you're reminded that your leg has exactly two speeds. Slow, and why are you dragging that? There's no snooze button, but there is a rooster who takes his job as human alarm clock personally. Good morning, your medieval day just started. The first thing you notice, after the searing pain in your knee, is the smell. It's a heady blend of wet straw, old turnips, and the kind of body odour that would get you removed from a modern gym. The medieval cottage is a marvel of open concept living, in the sense that you, your siblings, your livestock, and your lice are all sharing roughly the same 3 square meters of floor space. Privacy? Not unless you count the thick fog of wood smoke swirling just above head height. As you attempt to sit up, your foot catches on the straw mattress, a mattress so flat it's more concept than comfort. The stuffing migrated east sometime last winter, and now you're left lying on a lumpy bed that doubles as a flea retirement community. You swing your legs over the edge, only to find that your good foot has landed in something cold, wet, and organic. You don't bother identifying it. You're just grateful it isn't moving. Now comes the main event. Standing up. In a world where ergonomic design means not having a rock poking you in the ribs, this is a major feat. You brace yourself on the bedpost, which is mostly upright, and hoist yourself to vertical, your leg trailing behind like it's just as unenthusiastic as you are. There are no crutches, no rails, and no inspirational wall art urging you to live, laugh, love. There's just you, gravity, and whatever joint is the least inflamed this morning. The cottage is alive with activity, by which I mean several other people are stumbling around in various states of undress, trying not to trip over the dog, the goat, or each other. Your mother is already stoking the fire with one hand and whacking your brother awake with the other. The rooster has moved on to motivational crowing directly outside the window, making sure that everyone in a 3-village radius knows it's time to be miserable together. You shuffle toward the door, dragging your leg across the packed dirt floor. Each step is an adventure. Will it be firm ground, a loose stone, or that spot that turns into a mud pit every time it rains? Medieval accessibility isn't really a thing. The house has exactly one step, right at the front door, where everyone can stub a toe on their way out. You take it with all the grace of a sack of potatoes tumbling down a hillside. If you're lucky, your limp draws a little less attention in the daily chaos. Outside, the air is fresh, at least until the neighbor tosses out the chamber pot. You inhale cautiously, grateful for the brief moment of clean air before someone starts burning yesterday's refuse in a desperate attempt to keep the chill at bay. You're up before sunrise because, in medieval Europe, Sleeping in is something only rich people or the dead get to do. Now it's time for the daily debate. What, exactly, can you contribute today? On days when your leg feels generous, you might help gather firewood or herd the chickens, who are just as judgmental as the neighbours, by the way. On days when it's drag and complain mode, you're put on less glamorous tasks, like patching holes in the roof with mud or picking bugs out of the straw. There's no sick day. If you're not visibly on fire, you're expected to do your part. You get to save a breakfast, a bowl of pottage, basically hot, gluey sadness with a few vegetable chunks for variety. Eating is a group activity. You share a spoon with at least 3 other people and the goat, who will absolutely judge you for dropping anything. There's chatter, there's elbowing, and there's always at least one person speculating about what caused your limp this week. Was it God? Bad luck? A family curse? The theories are endless, and none of them are helpful. Before you can even finish your last spoonful, the day's work begins. The only real certainty is that you'll be tired, dirty, and almost certainly stepped on by a chicken at some point. But you're awake, upright, and ready to face another day in the most medieval way possible, one slow, stubborn step at a time. And honestly, that's already a victory. In the Middle Ages, disability isn't a medical term. It's whatever the neighbours decide it is. Limping? Must be a curse. Deaf? Clearly a message from God. Bad at archery? Sorry, that's just Tuesday. Your diagnosis depends entirely on who's in the mood to judge. Forget waiting for a doctor's opinion or a second opinion from your insurance provider. Your official medical record is the latest rumour being passed around while the bread bakes. The village has a single diagnostic tool: staring, followed by muttering, followed by long, deeply unhelpful discussions over mugs of weak ale. Did your leg go numb last winter? Aunt Agnes swears it's the result of angering a fairy in the cabbage patch. Your uncle blames the humours. Someone's always convinced it was the goat. When it comes to labelling, the Middle Ages really goes all in. Your limp, your twitch, or the way your left eye does its own thing, all become community projects. Overnight, your quirks become legends. You're not the guy with a sore hip, you're John the Crooked, or, if the crowd's feeling poetic, God's puzzle. If you're lucky, your new name sounds mysterious, maybe even heroic. If not, well, let's just say medieval nicknames don't pull any punches. Sometimes your disability isn't even physical. Maybe you're just shy. Maybe you stutter when it's cold. Or you prefer the company of chickens to people. Congratulations, you're now touched in the head. A diagnosis that covers everything from anxiety to refusing to eat beets. Medieval understanding of mental health boils down to, if you're acting weird, we'll let the priest sort it out. Spoiler. The priest thinks everything is caused by sin, demons, or a bad batch of cheese. There's no hiding either. The entire village is on the case. Kids are curious, adults are suspicious, and the elderly have already woven your condition into 3 different cautionary tales by the time you've finished your morning pottage. If you thought modern small towns were nosy, you haven't met medieval small towns. Your walk, your speech, your tendency to sneeze in threes, it's all public knowledge, and it's all up for debate. And the real fun begins with diagnosis by weather. Have a limp, and it starts raining? Clearly, you caused it. Thatched roof collapses? Must be the evil eye. Cows stop producing milk? Time to round up everyone who ever sneezed at a full moon and demand an explanation. Your health becomes everyone's business, and their business is usually suspicious and occasionally outright magical. If you're deaf, congratulations. You're halfway to sainthood or witchcraft, depending on whether the barley harvest goes well this year. You might be hauled into church to have holy water splashed at you, or you might be asked to bless someone's baby, just in case your condition is catching, but only the good parts. Medieval science, such as it is, can be summed up as shrug, pray, and if that fails, panic. For those with visible disabilities, every day is a parade, and you're the main float. People offer unsolicited advice, home remedies, and, if you're really unlucky, a boiled onion necklace to draw out the bad spirits. Sometimes, in an attempt to help, the village healer applies a poultice made of herbs, mud, and optimism. If you feel better, it's a miracle. If you don't, well, they'll just add more mud next time. Not all the attention is negative. Occasionally, your difference is seen as a sign of being chosen by higher powers. Someone's always eager to interpret your limp or your stammer as the mark of a future saint or the key to unlocking the next rainstorm. The line between reverence and suspicion is so thin, you could trip over it, and someone would immediately blame your bad foot. So, in the Middle Ages, disability isn't about diagnosis, treatment, or support plans. It's about reputation, legend, and making sure you never forget that everyone's watching. You're not just living with your condition, you're performing it every single day for the most judgmental audience in history, your neighbors. And that, in its own backwards, exhausting way, is how you end up with the only diagnosis that truly matters. Different enough to be interesting, but not so different you're burned at the stake. Sleep tight. You're not seeing a doctor. Those are reserved for people with money and most of their limbs. Instead, you get a local wise woman, a handful of herbs, and a priest with opinions on everything except actual medicine. Feeling under the weather? Congratulations. Your healthcare provider is either Gertrude the herbalist, whose main qualification is being too stubborn to die, or Father Bernard, who thinks your limp might be improved with a strong enough sermon. Medical privacy is non-existent. Everyone in the village knows when you're sick, what's wrong with you, and what colour your snot was yesterday. The first line of treatment? Prayer. Lots of prayer. Sometimes you get group prayer, with half the village kneeling around you, muttering Hail Marys and eyeing your rash as if it might spontaneously combust. If that doesn't work, it's time for a little home remedy. A poultice of bread, old goose fat, and herbs from a garden that's mostly weeds. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, especially if Gertrude's been at the mead again. Leeches are popular, not because they work, but because nobody has invented a better alternative, and leeches are cheap, plentiful, and easy to apply, if you can catch them. The theory is that sickness comes from bad blood, so why not let a slimy little worm drain it out? Bonus points if you faint from blood loss before the symptoms go away. Surgery is rare, and usually a last resort, performed on the same table where the pig was butchered last week. No anesthesia, just some strong ale and a couple of friends to hold you down. Barbers double as surgeons, which is convenient if you want a shave and an amputation in the same afternoon. If you're lucky, they'll use the clean saw. But what if you have a chronic condition? Maybe your leg has never quite been right, or your eyes don't see much past the end of your nose. There's not a lot of hope for a cure. But there's always a suggestion. Have you tried being less disabled? If you can't work, you might get shuffled off to a monastery, where the monks will pray over you and feed you boiled cabbage until you either recover or lose the will to argue. Let's not forget the pigeons. Medieval folk believed that pigeons could draw illness out of the body. Got a headache? Place a pigeon on your head and wait for it to absorb your pain. There's no explanation for what happens to the pigeon, but it's probably having a rough day too. And then there's the humours, the 4 bodily fluids that medieval medicine believes control everything from your mood to your limp. Too much phlegm? Try eating leeks and standing in the rain. Too much black bile? That's probably why you're grumpy and limping. The cures are creative, mostly based on things that sound hard to disprove. Eat a hedgehog, avoid onions during a full moon, or rub your knee with stale bread. Modern medicine it is not. If your symptoms look even remotely dramatic, you're at risk of attracting the attention of someone who thinks you're possessed. Seizures, sudden illness, or even just a weird mole can land you in front of an exorcist. That means holy water, loud chanting, and being slapped with a relic. If you survive the experience, congratulations. You're either cured or the latest addition to the village's list of local miracles. Of course, sometimes your healer just gives up. At that point, You're told your suffering is either God's will, a punishment, or, in rare optimistic moments, proof that you're destined for greatness. It's less of a medical system and more of a support group for people who don't mind waiting until the afterlife for relief. So when you wake up feeling off, just remember, in the Middle Ages, your best hope is a combination of stubbornness, low expectations, and maybe a pigeon or two. At least you'll have a good story for the next time you're sitting around the fire, explaining how your leg got even worse. And if all else fails, pray harder. It couldn't hurt unless you're allergic to pigeons. Forget wheelchairs, those don't exist. You have two options: a stick you carved yourself, or a sturdy friend. If you're really lucky, someone in the village might build you a device that's half walking aid, half accidental weapon. Let's start with the basics. The ground outside your door is a medieval obstacle course, designed by nature and maintained by people who think level is a sign of witchcraft. There are rocks, ruts, and mysterious puddles that may or may not move if you look at them too long. You can forget about smooth flagstones or convenient ramps. If you're not tripping over a root, you're sliding in the mud, or congratulating yourself for making it 3 feet before the neighborhood goose tries to bite your good ankle. Your trusty walking stick is, on its best day, equal parts support system and fashion statement. There are no sleek aluminum canes or ergonomic grips. You whittle your own from the nearest available branch, so it's always either too long, too short, or just lumpy enough to give you fresh blisters by lunchtime. After a few weeks, it acquires the unmistakable aroma of sheep, stale soup, and whatever you stepped in last Tuesday. You learn to wield it with the defensive skill of a medieval fencer. After all, it's not just for walking, it's for fending off livestock, shooing away street dogs, and occasionally pointing accusingly at whichever villager stole your spot by the fire. If your leg is worse than usual, or if you're nursing a more dramatic injury, you might try a crutch. Medieval crutches are an exercise in optimism. They're heavy, splintery, and constructed from whatever wood is left over after someone built a new roof. There's no padding, just hope and a rag tied around the top. After 10 minutes of hobbling, your armpit feels like it's being attacked by a very determined beaver. You could always try crawling, but that's only slightly less dignified than being dragged by your cousin who thinks you're lighter than you actually are. For the truly adventurous, there's always the village invention. Sometimes this means a neighbour constructs a kind of wheeled cart, which sounds promising until you realise it has no brakes, doesn't steer, and the only road is a mudslide that leads directly to the duck pond. Suddenly you're less person with mobility challenges and more unwilling participant in the medieval soapbox derby. If you survive, you'll have a story to tell and possibly a new limp to add to your collection. Then there are your friends, family, and whoever owes you a favour. Medieval society is weirdly communal when it comes to moving people around. If you need to get somewhere important, you might be slung over a pair of broad shoulders, hoisted onto a donkey, assuming you can persuade the donkey, or bundled into a wheelbarrow, because nothing says dignity like being trundled to church next to the week's turnip harvest. The upside? People do look out for you, as long as you're useful or at least funny at parties. Let's not forget stairs, the medieval nemesis. Every cottage, castle, and public building seems to have at least one set of stairs, steep, uneven, and placed in the most inconvenient locations possible. Handrails are just a rumour, and the only thing breaking your fall is a strategically placed basket of laundry, or occasionally, a very confused chicken. The average medieval step is calibrated to ensure maximum drama at minimum speed. Still, you learn to adapt. You memorize every bump and pothole in your daily path. You invent little games, like how many steps until I regret this, or is that mud or something worse. Sometimes, you become a sort of local celebrity. People watch to see how you'll tackle the bridge this time, or which livestock you'll outmaneuver. There's a certain pride in finding your own route, even if it involves climbing a wall, detouring through 3 backyards, or bribing the neighbour's kid with a chunk of cheese. In the end, getting around in medieval times is less about mobility and more about persistence, ingenuity, and a high tolerance for mud. Whether you walk, limp, crawl, or ride the world's worst wagon, every journey is an adventure and, frankly, a minor miracle. Lost a limb? Enter the world of wooden everything. Wooden legs, wooden hands, and the occasional iron hook. Comfort is not included. The craftsmanship is impressive, but you'll want to avoid stairs, and also hills, and basically movement in general. The morning you wake up missing a part of yourself is the morning you discover just how little the Middle Ages has to offer in terms of user-friendly technology. There are no instructional pamphlets, no reassuring YouTube tutorials, and certainly no prosthetist, unless you count old Bernard, who once nailed a plank to a goat and declared it fixed. You can forget about a lightweight carbon fiber limb. Your options are locally sourced and all natural. A wooden peg, an awkwardly whittled arm, or, for the truly fancy, an iron hook that may or may not have been used for fish before it became your new hand. Let's talk about the process. You don't just pop into a clinic. You limp, hop, or are dragged to the village carpenter, whose only prior experience is mending cartwheels and occasionally whittling crude figurines that somehow all look like St. Peter. The fitting is done by eye and by guesswork. The measurements? About this long, give or take a finger. There are no fittings, no adjustments, and no refunds. If it pinches, pokes, or simply refuses to cooperate, well, that's just incentive to walk it off. And if you think comfort is part of the design, think again. The wooden leg is attached to your stump with leather straps, hope, and whatever cloth you can scrounge for padding. After 2 hours of clomping around, you have blisters in places you didn't know existed. And in the summer, the combination of sweat, wood, and medieval hygiene laws is best left undescribed. The sound is another treat. A rhythmic thunk, 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 announcing your arrival before anyone can actually see you. Forget sneaking up on anyone, now you're the town's unofficial drummer. Let's say you're missing a hand. Lucky you. The options are even more creative. Some get a carved wooden fist, handy for dramatic gestures but utterly useless for, say, holding anything. Others receive a basic iron hook, which is excellent for hanging mugs at the tavern and terrible for just about everything else. The truly ambitious might try both, a wooden left, a hook right, and the permanent, sympathetic attention of every dog within a 20-mile radius. If you're a noble or a knight, and you lost a limb in battle, there's a small chance you'll be offered something slightly more advanced, like a prosthetic arm with a primitive hinge designed to hold a sword and nothing else. The downside? It weighs roughly as much as a small child and squeaks like a haunted door. The upside? It's a status symbol, and the local bard will probably write a song about how brave you look flailing at dinner. Hills? Forget about it. Uneven ground is a guaranteed disaster. And medieval stairs are just an elaborate prank played on anyone with mobility issues. Going up is a chore. Coming down is an exercise in gravity and hope. If you slip, your prosthesis might come off before you do. And don't expect repairs. If something breaks, you're at the mercy of the carpenter's current mood and whether he has any wood left after fixing everyone else's fence. Still, there's a strange pride in strapping on your new limb and facing the day. The village kids stare at first, then start following you around, begging for a demonstration. You become a walking legend, part cautionary tale, part inspiration. Some say you're cursed, others claim you're half hero, half tree. Either way, your story will be retold every winter by the fire, usually with more clomping and less dignity each time. So while medieval prosthetics may be more ouch than oomph, they're a testament to the human spirit and the world's least ergonomic age. No, you won't win any foot races, and your handshake may be a hazard, but you're moving, surviving, and giving the local goose something new to be terrified of. That, in the Middle Ages, is victory enough. If you're blind in medieval Europe, your best hope is a loyal dog, or maybe just an optimistic child. There are no guide canes, but there's always an abundance of loud, unhelpful advice from people who can't find their own shoes in the dark. Your world is sound, smell, touch, and the occasional accidental collision with a pig. The idea of accessibility is at best theoretical, usually discussed in the same tone as flying horses or bread that isn't stale. Paths are narrow, winding, and littered with every obstacle known to man. Carts, chickens, random buckets, and the neighbour's child who seems to exist solely to trip you. Stairs are less convenient shortcut and more ancient trap for the unwary. Doors open inward, outward, or occasionally just fall off, all for the dramatic effect of surprising someone who can't see them coming. When you wake up, your routine begins by listening. The fire crackles somewhere near the hearth. Footsteps, some heavy, some light, all equally capable of stepping on your toes. The dog yawns, stretches, and then remembers it's his job to herd you away from immediate danger, even if he still believes puddles are there for walking through, not around. You reach for your shoes, which someone has moved again, probably in the name of helpfulness. Your cane is a stick you picked up last year and never quite managed to lose, though half the village has borrowed it for everything from poking mud to herding geese. The first challenge of the day? Getting to the door without injury or collecting too much straw in your clothing. Family members call out cheerful instructions, left, right, watch out for the chamber pot, while simultaneously managing to be in your way at every possible moment. Outside, things get even more interesting. The path to the well is an exercise in faith, memory, and dodging the local livestock. Sometimes, a neighbour offers to help by grabbing your elbow and yanking you enthusiastically toward their intended destination, which is never the same as yours. Despite all this, you develop a sort of sixth sense, recognizing everyone by the sound of their footsteps, telling time by the church bell, and identifying who's about to visit based on how loudly they announce themselves. You know which chickens are where by their clucks, and you can tell if the neighbour's dog is sneaking into your garden just by the pattern of silence that follows. Your dog, meanwhile, has become the unofficial town guide, sometimes helping others even when you're fine on your own. He's smarter than half the council, and definitely more diplomatic. The village, for its part, is divided. Some treat your blindness as a curse, a sign that you need extra prayers and perhaps a splash of holy water. Others think you might possess hidden wisdom after all. You see things they don't, like when the bread is about to burn or who's stealing from the communal cheese supply. The priest will offer advice, mostly about patience and acceptance, while the village wise woman offers dubious potions made from questionable roots and a healthy side of superstition. She means well, but her last cure left you with purple stains and a mild rash. Children are endlessly fascinated by your magic. They test your senses with games, sometimes honest, sometimes more mischievous. Guess which hand the acorn is in, while adults whisper about your fate. Some think you're closer to God. Others worry you'll bring bad luck if you touch their bread dough. Every so often, a travelling storyteller comes through, spinning tales of blind prophets or miraculous healings, and the whole village stares at you, just in case inspiration strikes and you suddenly reveal the meaning of life. But through all the confusion, you adapt. You learn every sound, every smell, every subtle change in the wind. You find your way by counting steps, feeling walls, and trusting your four-legged companion to keep you out of the worst trouble. You know that, while others may pity you, you're the only person in the village who never has to see the state of the outhouse. And that, in its own way, is a medieval superpower. Sure, life isn't easy, but you've learned to navigate it, one cautious, clever, and occasionally dog-assisted step at a time. Being deaf means you miss out on church gossip, but also on instructions like watch out for the goose. Sometimes you're assumed to be simple, sometimes just mysterious. Either way, people shout at you as if volume can cure anything. The Middle Ages are not exactly known for their inclusive design. For someone who's deaf, daily life is a constant adventure in creative misunderstanding. In a world without written notes, flashing lights, or even a halfway decent system of hand gestures, communication is a game of chance. And everyone else thinks they're winning. Let's start with the basics. If you're born deaf or lose your hearing as a child, you'll quickly notice that nobody in your village is a trained interpreter. Sign language as we know it is centuries away, so instead, you develop your own unofficial language, a combination of pointing, miming, dramatic eyebrow movements, and the occasional desperate charade. You become a master of reading lips, mostly because you have to, though it's not easy when half the people you talk to are missing teeth and the rest have mustaches that could house a family of sparrows. People's reactions are predictably unpredictable. Some shout, convinced that if they yell at you loud enough, the sound waves will tunnel through your skull and flip your hearing back on. Others make up hand signals on the spot, which are often more confusing than helpful. A few treat you with a sort of mystical respect, as if you have access to a secret world, while others mutter about curses or the will of God and try to keep their distance, just in case deafness is contagious through eye contact. Social gatherings are, let's call them a mixed bag. You might get invited to a feast, but good luck following the jokes or keeping up with who's angry at whom. Half the time you just smile and nod, hoping you're not accidentally agreeing to marry someone's goat. On the plus side, you never have to pretend to care about what the priest says during Sunday Mass. And when the local busybody starts her monologue about turnip prices, you have the world's best excuse to zone out. If you live with family, you'll quickly find your household acting as amateur interpreters. Your siblings shout your name across the room, wave their arms like malfunctioning windmills, and frequently startle you by appearing at your elbow mid-sentence. If you live alone, your daily interactions consist mostly of getting by with shrugs, smiles, and the universal sign for I don't know, the medieval shoulder shrug. Work can be a challenge. If you're a craftsman, nobody minds if you keep quiet while hammering away. If you're a labourer, your main hazard is missing the shouted warnings about falling hay bales, runaway pigs, or an irate monk on a donkey. Occasionally, someone tries to teach you an important task using only facial expressions and wild hand gestures. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you accidentally invent a new way of milking goats. Results may vary. Still, there are perks. You're the only person in the village who's truly immune to the sound of the neighbour's bagpipes at 3 a.m. You can nap through thunderstorms, sleep through the rooster, and honestly claim you didn't hear your name when chores are being assigned. Medieval stress reduction at its finest. Of course, every so often you run into someone who genuinely tries to meet you halfway. Maybe it's a friend who develops a set of signals with you, or a child who's fascinated by your ability to read faces. Sometimes, the village healer tries to cure you with loud prayers, odd-smelling ointments, or a regimen of head-shaking and ear-poking. It never works, but at least you get some attention. Mostly, you just get on with things, adapting as needed. You learn to watch lips, read the room, and avoid the goose at all costs. You become a minor legend in your own way, the one who never hears an insult, never eavesdrops, and never has to listen to Uncle Harold's endless stories about turnip blight. And honestly, in a world as noisy, nosy, and nonsensical as the Middle Ages, deafness isn't just a challenge. It's sometimes the closest thing to peace and quiet anyone ever gets. Have a seizure in the Middle Ages and everyone immediately starts arguing, is it witchcraft, sin, or just too much cheese? Get ready for a flood of prayers, home remedies, and possibly an exorcism, none of which help your blood sugar. The Middle Ages have a medical toolkit that mostly consists of pointing, panicking, and praying with wild abandon. Epilepsy, known back then by roughly a dozen names, none of them helpful, is one of the great mysteries of the era. The village healer will be the first to loudly declare you're touched, and not in the affectionate way. The priest will swiftly follow, clutching his cross, and giving you a look usually reserved for wolves and unpaid taxes. Meanwhile, your relatives just wish you'd stop doing it at the dinner table. Let's say you have your first seizure at the village, right in front of the worst possible audience, a crowd of grandmothers and 3 sheep. Panic spreads faster than lice in a straw mattress. Someone shouts for holy water, someone else starts quoting the only Latin they remember, which may actually be from a drinking song, and someone always tries to shove bread in your mouth because that's what my uncle's cousin's cow's friend did once, and it worked. Science, medieval edition. There's a heated debate about the cause. Is it demons? Witchcraft? God's judgment for stealing extra bread at Lent? Or is it because you walked barefoot on a Friday while Jupiter was rising? Medical understanding is mostly based on what sounds dramatic and can be blamed on someone else. If you're lucky, they settle on bad humours, and you get treated to a session of bloodletting, leeches, or a nice cold bath, possibly all at the same time. Next comes the home remedies. The wise woman brings you a pouch of dried herbs that smell like disappointment, instructs you to wear a necklace of onions, and insists you sleep with a potato under your pillow to draw out the lightning. Sometimes she prescribes honey, sometimes vinegar, and sometimes just vigorous shaking, none of which help, but all of which add to the ongoing spectacle of your condition. Everyone means well, which is medieval code for, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'll do it loudly. And then there are the prayers. Oh, the prayers. Your name is now on every church list from here to the next county. The priest stops by every few days with a fresh supply of holy water, incense, and stories about saints who miraculously stopped twitching after a pilgrimage. He recommends confession, fasting, and occasionally standing on one leg while reciting the Psalms. If you survive all that, congratulations, you're either cured or just too exhausted to argue. Of course, if things get really dramatic, you may attract the attention of the exorcist. Nothing says comfort like being surrounded by a half-dozen villagers chanting and waving candles while someone shouts, "Leave this child, foul spirit." Meanwhile, you're mostly wondering if you can get a snack and a nap. Socially, epilepsy is a ticket to being the village curiosity. Children stare, adults whisper, and you are always the last to be picked for team sports, unless it's a game where sudden collapsing is an asset. There's pity, fear, and a lot of unsolicited advice. Some people avoid you, worried they'll catch whatever you have. Others think you might actually have special powers. If the crops are good this year, you're a living miracle. If there's a bad harvest, well, maybe don't answer the door after dark. Family can be hit or miss. Some relatives will fuss over you, bringing you odd-smelling concoctions and hiding the sharp objects. Others will keep a safe distance, just in case you start channeling the local spirits again. Either way, every time you so much as yawn, someone is already reaching for the holy water. In the end, living with epilepsy in the Middle Ages is a test of patience, endurance, and the ability to politely refuse another onion necklace. Medical help is somewhere between superstition and improv theatre, and the only guarantee is that someone will try to help you loudly, with a crowd. The next time you need a snack, maybe do it quietly and steer clear of the village well. Depending on where you live, you might be pitied, revered, or if you're really unlucky, displayed at the local fair. Sympathy sometimes comes with a side of condescension, and your suffering is always an opportunity for someone else's sermon. Welcome to the medieval social scene, where a limp, a stutter, or anything else that makes you different instantly becomes a community project. If you're fortunate, people shower you with small kindnesses, leftover bread, a warm seat near the fire, or the village's slightly less itchy blanket. But don't get too comfortable because every act of charity is accompanied by a heavy dose of storytelling. "Oh, that's Simon," someone whispers. "The one whose foot points west. Bless him. You are living proof that God works in mysterious, sometimes very confusing ways." Sometimes, pity is just the polite wrapping paper around old-fashioned exclusion. You might be allowed to attend the feast, but you're seated next to the door, easier for people to slip you a crust, harder for you to hear the good gossip. Everyone nods with exaggerated understanding, as if your mere presence means they should speak slowly and with many, many gestures. "Are you comfortable, dear?" is the most loaded question in the medieval world. The answer is always no, but it's not for lack of reminders. On the other hand, there's piety. Everyone loves an inspirational story. If you're patient enough and visible enough, you'll find yourself the accidental mascot of medieval virtue. Priests use you as the moral of a story in every sermon. Even though young Joan cannot walk, she is closer to God than any of us who can run to the tavern. You might even get paraded around during holy days, an unwilling participant in someone else's journey to sainthood. The more patient you look, the more spiritual points your neighbours rack up just by being near you. But let's not ignore the occasional profit. For some villages, your differences are an economic opportunity. Medieval fairs are famous for food, drink, jugglers, and yes, the human equivalent of Ripley's Believe It or Not. You could be displayed as the Blessed Cripple or the Miracle Mute, with a hat set out for coins. The church doesn't always approve, but the local tavern owner isn't complaining. Any crowd is a good crowd if they're buying ale. If you play along, you might even end the day with a handful of coins and more rumours about your origins than you can keep straight. Let's not pretend everyone's motives are pure. Sometimes, charity is just a way to look good in front of the neighbours. A loaf of stale bread here, a pat on the head there, and suddenly someone is nominated for Villager of the Month. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, say, right after a failed harvest or during an outbreak of something contagious, sympathy can flip to suspicion in record time. Now, instead of poor you, it's maybe this is your fault. Medieval logic is flexible like that. For some, there's a genuine fear. Many believe that any difference is contagious, spiritually, if not physically. You might find yourself kept at a distance, your cup washed twice, your spot by the fire scrubbed after you leave. Children are sometimes told not to stare, which guarantees they'll stare twice as hard. At the same time, stories about your special powers get bigger every year, until you're credited with everything from ending a drought to causing the blacksmith's hair to fall out. Yet, even with all the labelling, whispering, and unsolicited pity, you become a sort of legend. Your story is woven into the village tapestry, a warning, a hope, or sometimes just a handy excuse for someone's bad luck. Are you a burden or a blessing? Depends on the day and who's telling the story. So you learn to nod, to smile, and to accept that in the Middle Ages being different is everyone's business, whether you like it or not. At least you'll never be forgotten. In fact, you're the main character in everyone's favourite cautionary tale, Pity, Piety, and all. Most jobs involve ploughing, carrying, or running after livestock. If you can't do that, you're out of luck, or you find a creative way to turn your unique talents into employment. Enter the world of bell ringers, beggars, and professional saints in training. Let's start with the obvious. The medieval economy does not run on good intentions. It runs on back-breaking labour, preferably yours. The ideal worker is strong, sturdy, and completely uninterested in ergonomic safety. If you have a disability, you're not starting on an even playing field. You're starting somewhere behind the barn, stuck in the mud, trying to convince the chickens you belong there. If your hands work but your legs don't, the village might shuffle you into the role of bell ringer. You get to sit up in the tower, yanking on ropes and counting the hours, although your office is a drafty stone cube filled with bats, spiders, and the local pigeon population. The bells are heavy, the job is lonely, and if you sneeze at the wrong moment, you might end up ringing for someone's funeral by accident. Still, it's better than field work, and nobody minds if you mutter to yourself between peels. What about begging? In the Middle Ages, begging is not just tolerated, it's organised. Many towns require you to have a begging licence, which is like a medieval permit to be unlucky in public. The best begging spots are fiercely contested. The cathedral steps, outside the tavern, or the entrance to the weekly market. You'll need a compelling story and a sad face, or at least a physical quirk that makes passers-by clutch their rosaries and fumble for coins. Bonus points if you can recite a prayer or two. Piety opens more wallets than pity. Some people get even more creative. If you can sing, recite poems, or tell stories, you might earn a crust as a travelling minstrel, provided you don't mind heckling and sleeping in barns. If you're unusually patient and good at looking holy, You might get a reputation as a living saint in training. Locals line up for your blessing, and a few might leave food or candles as an offering. It's not much. But in a world without social security, you take what you can get, and then there's loafing medieval style. If you can't work, you're still expected to look busy, shuffling straw, minding the fire, or supervising the chickens. Some families invent jobs for you, stirring the pottage, counting turnips, or scaring crows away from the field. The real job is not to be a burden, or at least not a visible one. A little loafing is tolerated, but too much, and the local busybody will have opinions. Strong opinions. In rare cases, your disability might actually be an asset. Missing a hand? Maybe you're the only one small enough to reach into the mill's machinery. Deaf? At least you're not distracted by the blacksmith's hammer or the neighbor's endless complaints. If you have a visible limp or scar, you're occasionally recruited for village plays, usually as the villain or, if you're lucky, the town prophet of doom. Every community needs one. Of course, there are jobs no one wants: cleaning the latrines, scraping animal hides, or running errands for the priest. Sometimes you get volunteered because you can't run away quickly enough. There's also the ever-popular task of keeping the village idiot company. No one's quite sure what that means, but it apparently involves a lot of nodding and fetching water. For women with disabilities, work is a special kind of adventure. You might be confined to spinning wool, mending clothes, or looking after children whose only qualification for a babysitter is not currently on fire. Tasks are divided by who can do what with the least complaint. Whatever your role, work in the Middle Ages is a mix of necessity, improvisation, and survival. You do what you can, fake what you can't, and hope no one notices when you take an extra break behind the woodpile. If you're really lucky, maybe you'll find something you're good at, and if not, you can always become an expert at dodging responsibility, one slow, limping step at a time. Begging is both a profession and a performance. You need a license, a story, and a strategically placed patch on your clothing. Some towns treat beggars as part of the scenery. Others treat them like the reason for the next famine. In the Middle Ages, begging is not just the last resort for the unlucky. It's an entire subculture, a daily ritual, and, for many with disabilities, the only available career path. The process starts with the most medieval of bureaucracies, the almshouse or church office. You line up behind a parade of other unfortunates, each hoping for an official scrap of parchment, the coveted begging license. This tiny slip grants you the right to sit on the cathedral steps and ask strangers for coins without getting chased off by the constable, or worse, the local goose. But paperwork alone won't pay for bread. You need a story, a real tearjerker, ideally involving a lost limb, a tragic backstory, or a miraculous escape from wolves. The more creative, the better. Fell off a roof works, but attacked by bandits while saving orphans from a burning mill is gold. Extra points. If you can work in a saint's day, or a reference to being struck by mysterious lightning, then there's your costume. Successful beggars cultivate a look, ragged, patched clothing in the most visible places, elbows, knees, wherever a coin might land. You accessorize with a bandage or crutch. Even if you don't need one, it helps with the tips. Your spot is prime real estate. The church steps are the ultimate goal, but there's stiff competition from rival beggars, street preachers, and an old woman selling suspicious pies. Once you've secured your patch of cobblestone, it's showtime. Medieval begging is half persistence, half theatre. You practice your starving but humble face, perfect your sorrowful sigh, and maybe learn a verse of the Psalms for extra effect. If you can sing, all the better. Nothing tugs the heartstrings and purses like a chorus of "Have Mercy on the Poor" at full volume. Crowds are fickle. Some days, passers-by are generous, tossing coins and muttering blessings. Other days they grumble about too many mouths and suggest you try working. Never mind that you have one leg and the only job offer you've had this year involved wrestling pigs. A kind merchant might slip you a heel of bread, while a local noble might donate just to be seen donating. On a feast day, you might go home with a respectable haul. During a famine, people clutch their purses and cross themselves as they scurry by. Town attitudes vary. In bigger towns, beggars are part of the urban tapestry. No one looks twice at the man with the wooden leg or the blind woman with the singing dog. In smaller villages, you're either pitied, ignored, or blamed for every bad harvest and outbreak of suspicious boils. You quickly learn who's likely to give and who's just likely to give you a lecture. Even among beggars, there's a hierarchy. The regulars guard their territory fiercely. Newcomers are met with suspicion and sometimes outright sabotage. A missing crutch here, a stolen patch there. You might band together for protection, or, if times are good, split a cup of thin ale and share stories about the golden days when people were more generous and the pies less deadly. For those unable to speak or hear, begging takes even more creativity. You rely on exaggerated gestures, sorrowful looks, and, if you're lucky, a helpful child to repeat your story for you. Some folks develop reputations. The one who sings, the silent prayer, the man with the dancing dog. Any unique quirk becomes part of your brand, something that makes people remember you and, hopefully, part with a few extra coins. But no matter how skilled you are, medieval begging is a grind. At the end of the day, you count your coppers, dodge the local drunks, and make your way back to whatever shelter you've found, a barn, a church porch, or a communal straw bed at the almshouse. You eat what you've managed to beg, thank your lucky stars you're not in the stocks, and hope tomorrow's story is even better. Because in the Middle Ages, survival isn't just about strength. Sometimes, it's about being the best performer in a town full of critics. Monasteries sometimes take in people who can't work, if you can chant, pray, or at least not snore too loud. Being blessed by suffering might get you a warm meal, or at least keep you out of the weather for a few weeks. The monastic life is a medieval loophole for anyone who's not exactly built for ploughing fields or chasing pigs through muddy streets. Can't swing a scythe but can hum in Latin. Welcome to the Abbey. Your job interview consists of being observed during morning prayers to see if you can keep up with Amen and not fall asleep before the psalms are over. The monks and nuns have a soft spot for the afflicted, as long as your presence makes them look holier to the rest of the parish. Within the thick stone walls, life is quieter, mostly because everyone is sworn to silence before breakfast. If your disability keeps you from shouting over barnyard noise, it's practically an asset here. Chores are divvied up based on ability. Maybe you help mend robes, copy manuscripts, provided you can see straight. Or keep watch over the garden snails, who are also on their own spiritual journey. Sometimes you get assigned to prayer duty, which, if we're honest, is the medieval version of just try not to get in the way. Meals are simple, predictable, and taste like boiled pennants. The upside? No one expects you to cook, and you're rarely the last to get served. Compassion is an official part of the monastic diet. In winter, the dormitories are cold, but at least you're not sleeping outside. In summer, the bees are everywhere, but you can always find a quiet corner to contemplate your mysterious rash and try not to itch too loudly during evening vespers. For people with visible disabilities, monasteries offer a kind of medieval sanctuary. Blessed suffering is highly marketable. The abbot will parade you out when the bishop visits. Look how compassionate we are. And you might end up featured in a stained glass window if your limp has a good story behind it. Rumors will swirl about your spiritual insight. You might be asked for blessings, or prayers for rain, or to touch someone's sick goat. Results may vary. Sometimes, the religious life is less about genuine care and more about administrative convenience. You might find yourself doing all the tasks that require quiet perseverance, translation, jobs no one else wants, scrubbing candle wax, sorting lentils, or organizing the library's collection of very boring sermons. If you're extra unlucky, you'll be put in charge of ringing the bell at odd hours, ensuring that the entire monastery knows when it's time to wake, sleep, or pray for forgiveness after sneezing on a relic. Yet, life in the cloister isn't all gloom and Gregorian chant. There's a rhythm to the days, a predictability you won't find in the outside world. People don't stare quite as much. Your story, whatever it is, becomes part of the great patchwork of monastic legends. Sister Edith, the one with the miraculous knees, or Brother Peter, who never heard a thing but could recite the Psalms backward. The air smells like incense and beeswax, and you get used to the faint echo of your own footsteps on cold flagstones. Of course, every monastery has its quirks. There's always a monk convinced he can cure you with a special blend of herbs and muttered prayers, and at least one nun who watches you just a little too closely, as if waiting for you to levitate. The abbot will remind you that suffering brings you closer to God, which is small comfort during a medieval cold snap. Still, it beats fending off geese in the marketplace. And sometimes, if you're truly unlucky, or blessed, depending on how you look at it, your condition might be deemed miraculous enough to draw visitors from far and wide. Suddenly, you're the abbey's best marketing campaign. People line up for your advice, your blessing, or just to touch the hem of your robe. If you play your cards right, you can leverage your suffering for a little extra soup at dinner. So, in the great medieval lottery of life, the religious path is one way to find a roof, a routine, and at least one person who thinks your limp is evidence of divine favor. You may not find healing, but you'll definitely find stories, yours and everyone else's too. Your family is either your only safety net or the first to put you outside when food runs low. Sometimes you're an honored grandparent, sometimes you're Aunt Mildred, whose bed is suspiciously close to the drafty door. Family in the Middle Ages is a double-edged butter knife, blunt, slightly rusty, and occasionally pointed in your direction. On good days, they're the ones keeping you fed, warm, and relatively lice-free. On bad days, they're calculating how much you eat, how much you contribute, and whether that squeaky cough of yours means another mouth to feed next winter. If you can't pull your own weight in the fields, you'd better be good at something, like telling stories, mending socks, or scaring crows off the vegetable patch. Let's be honest. Your place in the medieval household depends on a mix of luck, affection, and sheer stubbornness. The eldest son gets the best blanket. The youngest gets the warm spot by the fire. You, with your limp, weak eyesight or unpredictable fits, might get wedged between the firewood stack and the family goat. Medieval architecture is not famous for its accessibility, unless you count leaning against the wall so you don't fall over as a safety feature. Sometimes, disability is seen as a family curse, the result of some ancestor offending a saint, a fairy, or the neighbor with an impressive vegetable garden. Other times, you're regarded as the family's chance at a miracle, a future saint in waiting, or at least a handy reason for people to bring food offerings when times are tough. If you're very lucky, you become the household mascot, consulted for advice, comfort, or just because you always have an opinion about the weather. Children aren't exempt from this social calculus. A child born with a visible disability might be fussed over as an infant, wrapped tightly, kept close, and given the choicest scraps from the pot. As soon as they're old enough to waddle, the expectations start piling up. Can you shell peas, herd the smaller geese, hold the door open while your siblings dash through with the turnip harvest? Everyone has to do their part, even if your part involves less running and more creative supervision. But medieval survival is a family sport, and every player counts, until, suddenly, they don't. When food is short or winter's harsh, priorities shift fast. The family council, informal but always dominated by the loudest aunt, might decide it's time for you to visit the monastery or help out with the neighbor's children for a while, which can be code for eat elsewhere, please. Some families cling fiercely to every member, sharing what little they have, while others are practical, even ruthless, about thinning the breakfast line. Aging brings its own perils and perks. If you make it to grandparent status, no small feat, given the medieval diet and enthusiasm for hard labor, you might enjoy a certain reverence. Children gather for your stories. Teenagers roll their eyes at your advice. And adults consult you about everything from curing rashes to curing ham. Or You might simply become that figure who is always there, wrapped in the world's itchiest blanket, offering cryptic commentary from your corner of the room. And let's not forget marriage. A disability doesn't rule out family life, but it changes the negotiation. If you have land, skills, or a particularly generous dowry, you might find a spouse. If not, you might find yourself acting as the extra set of hands, or eyes, or ears in a brother's household, helping where you can and avoiding the worst chores by expertly playing the "I'd love to, but you know my hip" card. Still, for all its drama, a medieval family is the ultimate backup plan. When the weather turns or sickness strikes, they're your first and sometimes only defense against the world. They'll patch your clothes, complain about your snoring, and make fun of your limp, but heaven help the outsider who tries to do the same. In the Middle Ages, blood, and sometimes sheer proximity, is thicker than pottage. So whether you're blessing, burden, or backup plan, you're woven deep into the family fabric, and that's the only insulation you're going to get against the medieval cold. Medieval folks love a miracle almost as much as they love blaming someone else for bad weather. Disabilities can make you a candidate for sainthood or for a quick witch trial. There's not much in between. Life in the Middle Ages comes with a generous helping of superstition, sprinkled over every cough, limp, or sudden sneeze. When you walk with a cane, stutter during prayers, or simply look a little different, you're the unwitting star of the village's favourite reality show. Miracle or monster. There's no middle ground, only a parade of villagers ready to pin their wildest hopes and deepest fears on your head, whether you want them to or not. Let's say you survive a terrible illness and come back walking sideways but smiling. Suddenly, you're not just Margaret, the baker's daughter, you're Margaret the Blessed. And rumours swirl about your mysterious recovery. People start dropping by to ask for a lock of your hair or a blessing on their cheese. The priest makes you sit up front at Mass, just in case your holy presence rubs off on the more sinful pews. You become a living relic, and nobody will let you eat in peace without someone poking at your scars for a little extra luck. But superstition is a fickle friend. The same crowd that kneels for your blessing when the wheat crop looks good is ready to turn on you when things go sideways. A thunderstorm at the wrong moment, a stillborn goat, or the sudden appearance of mouldy bread, and suddenly you're Margaret the Cursed. You're accused of everything from cursing the well to enchanting the mayor's new boots. Someone's always ready to testify about the time they saw you talking to a black cat or muttering to yourself near the hedgerow. If your disability is visible, the stakes are higher. Unusual birthmarks, twitches, or a missing limb? Some will say you're marked by God, destined for something special. Others will mutter that you've been touched by the devil, and not in the nice way. You might find yourself the target of unwanted attention from the local healer, who insists on drawing out the evil spirits with everything from smelly herbs to bloodletting. The process is loud, public, and rarely effective, but everyone feels better once they've had a turn suggesting a cure. Of course, for some, suspicion tips over into accusation. The medieval witch trial is more than just a plot device. It's a very real risk, especially if you're a woman, a little odd, or just happen to be standing in the wrong place during a hailstorm. You get blamed for the unexplained, the unlucky, and the downright inconvenient. Maybe you have a seizure at the market. Suddenly, there are whispers of unnatural powers, and someone's digging out the old test for witches. Spoiler, it involves water, weights, and very little common sense. On the flip side, there's always the slim chance of sainthood. Sometimes, suffering is seen as proof of divine favour. If you can perform a minor miracle, heal a rash, predict the weather, or even just stay alive longer than expected, you might become a local legend. People travel for miles to see you, offer gifts, or ask for a miracle of their own. The downside? Every time there's a new disaster, everyone expects you to fix it. For the most part, you tread a narrow line, careful not to be too miraculous, too strange, or too unlucky. You perfect the art of humble gratitude when things go well, and quiet invisibility when things go badly. You accept every prayer, blessing, and protective trinket handed to you by concerned neighbours, just in case. In the end, life with a disability in the Middle Ages is a high-wire act over a moat of superstition. Whether your miracle or monster depends less on you and more on the weather, the harvest, and whatever story the town crier decides to shout next. If nothing else, you'll never be bored, and you'll always be at the center of medieval attention, whether you like it or not. Think you'll find love? It's not impossible, but you'd better hope your dowry is bigger than your limp. Marriage is mostly about land and alliances, but every so often, two oddballs find each other over a bowl of very bland soup. The medieval dating scene is less swipe right and more survive until spring. If you're living with a disability, marriage negotiations take on all the subtlety of a cattle auction. Families want healthy children, extra hands for the fields, and a spouse who won't need to be carried through the mud every market day. Suitors and their parents size you up the same way they'd judge a goat: teeth, strength, and a general ability to withstand bad weather. Still, hope springs eternal, or at least limps along. If you come with property, a fat dowry, or a prized cow, suddenly your limp is just character. The priest will find a nice passage about patience and suffering, and Aunt Mildred will assure everyone that love can bloom in the strangest soil. Sometimes, an arranged marriage is struck. Your family trades a plot of cabbage land, the promise of 2 geese. And you, limp, stutter, or all, to a neighbouring farmer with more turnips than prospects. For most, romance is optional. The average peasant's idea of a first date is working side by side in the fields and seeing who can last the longest without collapsing. If you can't keep up, you might get left behind, but if you've got a sharp wit or a knack for storytelling, you might win someone's heart anyway. After all, when evenings are long and pottage is bland, there's a premium on anyone who can make the soup seem less tragic. The reality is that love matches are rare, but not impossible. Occasionally, 2 unmatchables find each other. Maybe you both limp, or one of you is blind and the other can't hear. The whole village watches as you fumble through awkward courtship rituals, like tripping over each other in church, or exchanging gifts of questionable cheese. Your wedding might be smaller than most, but you get the same cold blessing from the priest and the same stale bread at the feast. Of course, there are hurdles beyond the obvious. Some communities are deeply suspicious of marrying off a defective child. Rumours swirl about curses, and more than one hopeful bride or groom has been rejected at the last minute because someone's grandmother dreamt of 3 black crows. Even if you do find a match, married life isn't exactly a picnic. You're expected to pull your weight, cooking, cleaning, surviving childbirth, and of course, producing heirs. If that's off the table, you might get shuffled into a relative's household as honorary aunt or uncle with mysterious aches. Still, being married brings certain advantages. You have an official seat at the fire, someone to scratch your back, or at least complain at you for snoring, and a built-in ally for surviving the daily grind. If you're lucky, your spouse is kind, patient, and only moderately superstitious. If you're less lucky, you get the cold side of the straw mattress and the lion's share of the blame when anything goes wrong in the garden. And let's not forget widows and widowers. People with disabilities sometimes find second chances, especially if they inherit property or bring children into the mix. A good storyteller or talented cook can always find someone who appreciates their skills, even if romance is more practical than passionate. At the end of the day, medieval marriage for those with disabilities is a lesson in making do, making deals, and occasionally making each other laugh. The odds might be stacked against you, but love, or at least companionship, finds a way. Sometimes it's over a bowl of bland soup. Sometimes it's just 2 people agreeing that it's better to be odd together than alone. And if nothing else, you always have a story for the grandchildren, if they'll sit still long enough to listen. When it comes to sleeping arrangements, you're either in the best spot by the hearth, because you need it most, or you're on the cold edge with the goats. Accessibility is a distant dream. Stairs. Everyone just falls up and down them together. The medieval home is a masterclass in discomfort. Forget private rooms, let alone private bathrooms. If you're lucky, Your family shares a one-room cottage with a leaky thatch roof, a smoky fire, and enough straw bedding to host a small rodent convention. If you're less lucky, you're on the floor, fighting for a patch of warmth between the drafty door and the resident goat, who has zero respect for personal space. Now, suppose you have a disability, a limp, a stiff joint, or an eye that refuses to cooperate. Suddenly, the logistics of home life become a full-contact sport. Every evening is a silent contest to snag the spot closest to the hearth, where the warmth just barely takes the edge off winter. You hope someone takes pity and offers you the prime location, but you're also up against Grandad, 3 small children, and a dog who has mastered the art of looking tragically cold. Accessibility? In medieval terms, that means you have a stick to lean on and a cousin who occasionally helps you over the threshold. If your house is built on a slope, and half of them are, every trip outside is an adventure in mud, ice, or both. Getting through the front door can require advanced negotiation skills and sometimes a running start. Inside, the floor plan is best described as open concept chaos. There's a bed, or what passes for one, against one wall, a pile of straw somewhere else, and everything else just wherever it landed. Stairs, if you have them, are steep, crooked, and designed by someone with a deep grudge against knees. Railings are mythical. Most families sleep on the ground floor to avoid climbing. But if you're in a loft, well, hope you enjoy sliding down with the firewood. If you can't move around easily, you learn the geography of every creaky board and loose stone by heart. You memorize the path to the fire, to the door, and, most importantly, to the communal chamber pot. Any obstacle is a hazard, from stray boots to a sleeping piglet. At night, the darkness is complete. Your only guide is memory, or the occasional helpful toe, stubbing to remind you where you are. Sometimes, the best spot in the house is also the loudest. The hearth comes with the constant chatter of family, the snoring of elders, and the occasional ash cloud to keep things interesting. If you're on the outer edge, you get more peace, but also more cold, more drafts, and more surprise visits from the mouse population. In larger households, accessibility is a matter of seniority, or politics. Children get the softest beds, so they'll grow up strong. The elders get the warmest corner, so they don't complain, and you, with your limp or aches, get what's left. If you're extra charming, you might convince someone to switch. If not, at least the goat is warm. Public housing options aren't much better. Almshouses and hospices offer shelter for those who can't work. But privacy is non-existent and the food is hearty. Translation: it exists. You sleep among strangers, some of whom snore so loudly you wonder if the Black Death is making a comeback. The only consolation is that, here, everyone is a little down on their luck, and competition for the warm corner is fierce but fair, usually settled with a grumble and a blanket tug of war. Through it all, you make do. You develop strategies, claiming your spot early, trading chores for the best seat, and always keeping an eye out for a new draft in the wall. When in doubt, you pile on more blankets or more people. In the Middle Ages, warmth is a group activity. So housing, for the disabled and able-bodied alike, is a game of musical beds with only one rule: don't be last. If you land near the fire, count yourself blessed. If you're next to the door, at least you're the first one out in the morning, and maybe, just maybe, the goat will finally learn to share. Medieval laws sometimes protect people with disabilities. Sometimes. Other times, you're forbidden from testifying, owning property, or even inheriting sheep. Your best legal advice is probably don't attract attention. Let's be honest, medieval justice is a complicated stew, stirred by whoever's holding the ladle that week. If you're living with a disability, the legal system is both your occasional shield and your constant headache. On good days, you might benefit from a patchwork of rules meant to protect the afflicted. On bad days, the village constable greets you with a sigh and a "what is it this time?" as you limp, crawl, or get carried into the manor court for the 3rd time this year. First, the fine print. In some places and times, medieval laws do make space for people with disabilities. Maybe you're exempt from military service, or you can avoid jury duty. If such a thing exists in your corner of Christendom, a few enlightened charters even require towns to provide basic support, like a place in the almshouse or a loaf of bread on feast days. Sometimes, the church steps in with a decree that the sick, the lame, and the blind are to be cared for, or at least not actively thrown in the river. But don't get too excited. These protections are as reliable as a thatched roof in a thunderstorm. Other laws are less about inclusion and more about exclusion. You might be barred from testifying in court, because, apparently, a limp or a stutter is clear evidence of unreliable character. If you can't speak, can't hear, or just make people uncomfortable, your legal opinions are filed straight under nice try, but no. Property rights? Let's just say medieval inheritance law is a lively sport, especially when livestock and land are on the line. If you have a visible disability, the family lawyer, also known as Uncle Godfrey, who once read half a legal scroll, may argue you're unfit to inherit. A bad limp could mean losing your claim to the family's prized goat, or being skipped over for the all-important winter cabbage patch. Sometimes the courts agree, and sometimes the judge just wants to get to lunch before the pottage goes cold. Then there's marriage law. If your condition is well known, the priest might ask some extra questions before blessing your union, or worse, suggest you take a vow of celibacy instead. And should your spouse try to leave you for failure to perform marital duties, there's a decent chance the local court will hear the case, just not necessarily in your favor. Criminal law is an adventure all its own. If you're accused of a crime, your best hope is that the village likes you enough to testify on your behalf, since you might not be allowed to do so yourself. If you're the victim, good luck convincing anyone that it wasn't just God's will. But sometimes, a disability works in your favor. If the thief was just a little blind, he might get a lighter sentence. If you can't run, they'll at least avoid putting you on the stocks. Too much trouble to carry you there and back. For many, the safest legal strategy is invisibility. Don't attract attention. Don't get involved in disputes over property lines or stolen chickens. If the Lord's tax collector can't remember your name, you might just avoid the next round of fines. If the manor court clerk can't read your handwriting, that's just one more mystery in the medieval bureaucracy. Every so often, a big-hearted judge or kindly priest bends the rules in your favor, allowing you to own land, testify, or claim a lost sheep. More often, though, the law is less about justice and more about keeping the village running with the least possible hassle. You adapt, finding loopholes and allies, learning when to show up and when to make yourself scarce. So in the world of medieval law, living with a disability means learning to navigate rules that change with the wind, the weather, and whoever's wearing the fanciest hat. If you want justice, you'd better bring a strong stomach, a good friend, and, just in case, a backup plan for your sheep. The church loves a good miracle, but is less enthusiastic about actual daily assistance. Sometimes you're paraded as proof of God's mysterious ways. Sometimes you're just asked to pray quietly and not interrupt the relic display. Step into any medieval town, and you'll find the church at the center, literally, architecturally, and in just about every other way that matters. For anyone with a disability, the church is both a possible source of hope and a reliable source of confusion. If you're lucky, your suffering is just mysterious enough to attract holy attention without tipping into the needs exorcism category. Let's start with the help. In theory, the church is a haven for the sick, the lame, the blind, and the generally unlucky. Monasteries and abbeys might provide you with a bowl of pottage, a dry bed, and a daily dose of prayer, provided you can tolerate the smell of incense and Gregorian chant at sunrise. The local priest will assure you that your suffering brings you closer to God, a statement that sounds much more comforting if you're not the one hobbling up the aisle every Sunday. Sometimes, your presence is used as a living sermon illustration. You're paraded in front of visiting bishops or eager pilgrims. offered as evidence that the village is especially holy, or at least especially in need of divine intervention. With any luck, a few silver coins will make their way into your pocket, courtesy of a wealthy noble hoping to buy good karma for their next military campaign. You become the living embodiment of blessed are the meek, with all the attention and zero of the actual property. But the church can also hinder. Not every cleric is compassionate, and not every parish welcomes the afflicted. If your symptoms look suspiciously supernatural, convulsions, muttering, or inconvenient timing during Mass, you might find yourself the subject of concerned inquiry. The priest might decide you need holy water, extra prayers, or even a quick trip to the local exorcist. Nothing wakes you up quite like being doused with cold water and surrounded by a choir singing off-key at top volume. And then there's the haunting. If you're not parade material or miracle fodder, you may be gently encouraged to sit quietly in the back pew. Don't distract the congregation. Don't touch the relics. Please avoid any unscheduled miracles until after Vespers. The church has a certain order, and too much excitement, especially the twitchy, unpredictable kind, can unsettle the faithful. You might find yourself the last in line for communion or the first to be volunteered for extra confession, just in case your limp is the result of spiritual slacking. Yet for all its quirks, the medieval church does offer a lifeline. Charitable donations, alms, and annual feast days mean at least one good meal and maybe a new tunic if the parish is feeling generous. If you're lucky, you'll get invited to join the local brotherhood or sisterhood, an official spot for people with special circumstances. The community might rally around you, offering prayers and sometimes practical help, like patching your roof or hauling water. Of course, some see your suffering as a direct line to the miraculous. Your presence is a constant reminder to pray harder, give more, and keep one eye on the heavens, just in case God decides to send down a real miracle this time. If your condition ever improves, expect a wave of visitors hoping for a bit of your leftover luck. If it gets worse, well, at least you'll be well remembered in the next round of sermons. Still, the church's approach is always a careful balancing act between help, hinder, and haunt. Some priests see you as a burden, others as a blessing, and most as a little of both. You learn to smile politely at the well-meaning, to dodge the overzealous, and to thank the saints that at least, in church, everyone gets to kneel sooner or later. So when you find yourself sitting quietly in a pew, soaking up the warmth of the candles and the whispers of prayers, remember, the church may not always be fair or fast with help, but it's always watching, and sometimes, just sometimes, it really does throw a miracle your way. Medical help is a mix of herbs, hope, and a lot of confusion. If your ailment can be treated with leeches, congratulations, you're on the cutting edge. If not, expect to be prescribed a poultice, a prayer, or possibly just a nap. Let's set the scene. You wake up feeling unwell, maybe your leg aches, your eyes itch, or you're seeing visions of turnips with wings. In the Middle Ages, this is not the start of a straightforward journey to recovery. It's the first step on a winding road through a landscape of wild herbs, wishful thinking, and relatives who swear their cousin's neighbor's goat was cured of something similar by walking backward around a tree. Your first stop? The local healer. She's part herbalist, part rumor collector, and part unlicensed barber. Her medicine chest is a collection of dried roots, mysterious powders, and things she found in the woods that smell medicinal. If you're lucky, she's read a medical scroll or two. If not, she's just going to improvise and hope for the best. Her favorite solution for everything from headaches to heartbreak: a steaming mug of herbal tea that tastes suspiciously like boiled lawn clippings. If the wise woman is stumped, or just in a hurry, she'll call in the next line of defense: prayer. A visit from the priest means holy water, a blessing, and a firm reminder that suffering brings you closer to the saints. You might even get a special candle to burn at home, provided you promise not to set the thatch on fire. If you're still not feeling better, everyone agrees it's probably time for leeches. Leeches are the medieval Swiss army knife of healthcare. Too hot? Leeches. Too cold? More leeches. Limping? Surely the leeches will sort that out. The theory goes that bad blood is the cause of most ailments, and nothing gets rid of bad blood like a few hungry worms clinging to your leg for an hour. The aftermath, dizziness, bloodstains, and a deep distrust of puddles are just part of the process. If your problems aren't solved by draining your blood, it's time to try a poultice. These are handmade blobs of hope, constructed from mashed herbs, onions, bread, and sometimes something the dog left behind. You wrap it around the offending limb, say a quick prayer, and try not to think about the smell. If the poultice falls off before dinner, just slap on another. At least it keeps the flies interested. Of course, not all medicine is applied directly. There are medicinal baths, involving hot water if you're wealthy, or just sitting in a pond and pretending it's holy if you're not. There are also ointments, thick, sticky concoctions that promise to draw out fevers but mostly just draw in cats. Pills? Not invented yet. Injections? Only if you count accidental bee stings. If you're really unlucky, the barber surgeon might get involved. Surgery is performed with a prayer, a strong drink, and a crowd of onlookers. Tools are basic, the patient is brave, and the risk of infection is higher than the average medieval ceiling. Afterwards, you get a pat on the head and the advice to sleep it off. Sometimes, a goat is involved, either as the source of a cure, the carrier of a disease, or just because someone's grandmother once dreamed of a goat and a full recovery. The lines between science, folklore, and livestock are thin and easily crossed. You may be advised to sleep with a sheep for warmth, eat garlic for strength, or rub your knee with a blessed chicken feather. Results may vary. The truth is, medieval medicine is equal parts hope, habit, and hocus pocus. Sometimes you get better on your own, sometimes the cure is worse than the complaint, and sometimes everyone agrees that a good nap and a hot drink are the best medicine after all. At least you'll have a story about the time you survived the local healer, the priest, and a goat, all in the same week. And if you wake up feeling better, it must have been the leeches, or maybe just luck. There are no ramps, no handrails, and the roads are designed to challenge even the ablest bodies. Your average trip to the market is an Olympic event. Good luck avoiding the pigs, the potholes, and the medieval equivalent of banana peels. Getting anywhere in the Middle Ages is a feat, but when you're living with a disability, every journey becomes a test of patience, ingenuity, and sheer stubborn willpower. Let's start with the basics. Roads are either knee-deep in mud or ankle, crackingly hard. Cobblestones are for the rich, and even they trip over them, while everyone else makes do with uneven tracks pitted by wagon wheels, hoof prints, and the mysterious craters that appear after every storm. Suppose you've got a limp, a wooden leg, or you simply can't move as quickly as the rest of the village. The concept of accessibility is, well, non-existent. Bridges are little more than wobbly planks flung across suspiciously fast-moving streams. Steep slopes are everywhere. Stairs crop up where you least expect them, and any path worth travelling will inevitably end with you face to face with a flock of sheep that refuses to yield the right of way. If you use a stick, crutch, or the world's creakiest homemade wagon, each outing requires strategic planning. First, there's the matter of your route. Do you take the short way through the muddy field, risking wet feet and potential goose ambushes, or the long way around, which means you have to climb over Old Man Carver's wall, watch out for the nettles, and hope nobody's chasing the pig herd down the lane? It's not just the terrain. Other travellers are more hazard than help. Carts laden with hay or beer barrels are pushed by people who barely look where they're going. The local children treat you as both obstacle and entertainment, sometimes offering a helpful shove, sometimes darting underfoot like caffeinated ferrets. Friendly neighbours might offer an arm, but they tend to forget you can't match their pace, yanking you along so quickly your feet barely brush the ground. Let's talk about transportation. Horses and donkeys are technically available, but unless you're a noble, the family donkey is more interested in nibbling weeds than helping you get to the next village. If you can convince someone to give you a ride, prepare for a saddle with all the comfort of a pile of rocks. Cart rides aren't much better. Every bump is a personal message from the gods reminding you not to take spinal alignment for granted. Markets, fairs, and religious festivals are the biggest travel headaches. Crowds press in from all sides, the ground is thick with dropped vegetables, and every shouting merchant seems to stand right where you need to go. If you have a visible disability, the crowd parts, sometimes out of kindness, sometimes superstition, often just to avoid the unpredictable swinging of your crutch. Still, the journey home, weighed down by a sack of onions and whatever you manage to haggle, can feel like scaling a mountain made of cheese and regret. Don't even think about long-distance travel. Pilgrimages and trade trips are the medieval version of reality TV, Survivor, but with fewer palm trees and more open sores. Hostels and inns rarely have ground floor rooms, and if you fall behind the group, you risk being left at the side of the road, at the mercy of weather, wild dogs, and the occasional highwayman who's more curious than threatening. Yet, as with everything else, people find ways to adapt. Maybe you strike up an alliance with the local baker's son, who's always eager for an adventure, or at least an excuse to skip chores. Maybe your family custom builds a wagon that doesn't break at the first bump. Maybe you just learn to rest often, laugh at the mud, and treat every trip like a heroic quest, with bonus points for every time you don't end up face first in a puddle. Travel in the Middle Ages is messy, slow, and occasionally humiliating. But if you make it home in one piece, you've already accomplished more than most. And if you manage to keep your shoes dry and the pigs at bay, you might just call it a perfect day. Eating with a disability can be tricky, especially if your hands don't cooperate. But on feast days, everyone gets something. If you can fight your way to the table, or guilt trip a relative into bringing you a portion. Let's talk about everyday meals first, because the Middle Ages are a masterclass in culinary humility. Most days, food is pottage, a thick stew of beans, grains, mystery greens, and the occasional unlucky beetle. If you're living with any kind of physical challenge, meal times are their own mini-adventure. Maybe your hands shake, or your fingers don't bend like they used to. Spoons are rare, knives are dull, and everything seems to require just a little more dexterity than you have on offer. Dropping a bowl is a family event. Everyone gets a turn to comment, sigh, or suggest you eat more slowly, as if you're doing it for fun. If you have to rely on others for help, it's a delicate dance of pride and necessity. The village children might take turns feeding you, always making sure to point out how well behaved they're being for the audience of approving adults. Adults, on the other hand, are not above loudly offering advice while expertly ignoring your actual needs. "Try not to spill it this time, uncle," someone says, just as you attempt to balance a ladleful of hot turnip pottage on your knee. Still, there's a certain camaraderie in these shared meals. Everybody eats together, around the fire or at the rickety table, and stories flow faster than the weak ale. Food is both fuel and social glue. If you can laugh about your own clumsiness, you're halfway to a second helping. But don't get too comfortable. In lean times, portions are small, and every scrap is spoken for. If you're the slowest eater or need help with every bite, you might get edged out in the scramble for the last crust of bread. But then come the feast days, Christmas, harvest, saints' days, when even the poorest household puts on a spread. The menu expands to include actual meat, if the pig cooperated, pies filled with apples or whatever the cook found under the hedge, and great heaps of bread. These are the days everyone remembers. The good smells, the warm fire, the promise of enough food for everyone, at least until the guests arrive. If you have a disability, feast days can be equal parts joy and logistical nightmare. You might be given the best seat, out of respect, pity, or just to keep you out of the way. Or you could end up stuck at the far end of the table, beyond reach of the gravy but squarely in the path of every child running by with sticky hands. Your strategy? Secure an ally, usually a sibling with a soft spot or a cousin angling for your share of next year's dried apples, to bring you the best bits before the crowd descends. The actual act of eating is still complicated. Forks are mostly a rumour. You use bread as a scoop and hope you don't drop too much into your lap. If you're lucky, someone will carve your meat for you or slice your cheese, though there's always the risk they'll forget your portion in the chaos. And if you can't serve yourself, be prepared for someone to pile your plate with whatever they think you should eat, often heavy on the turnips, light on the pie. Yet, even with the awkwardness, food is a rare source of dignity and delight. On feast days, everyone is meant to be equal, at least for the length of a meal. You swap stories, toast to good health, and, if you're clever, sneak a second helping while the priest is distracted by a particularly enthusiastic hymn. At the end of the meal, you sit back or slump with the rest, savouring the full belly and the fleeting sense of togetherness. In the medieval world, every meal is hard won, but every feast is a victory. And if you manage to get the first turnip, well, that's a miracle in itself. In a world where everyone is expected to fight, what happens if you physically can't? Sometimes you're left behind, sometimes you're put on spiritual duty, and sometimes you end up inspiring a ballad no one actually sings. Warfare in the Middle Ages is not just for knights in shiny armor. It's an equal opportunity disaster. And most people, peasants included, are expected to grab something pointy and show up when trouble arrives. But if you're living with a disability, your prospects on the battlefield, or even in the village militia, are complicated, to say the least. Let's start with conscription, when the local lord calls for able-bodied men, and, when things get desperate, not so able-bodied men, there's always a tense pause in the village square. Maybe you limp, maybe you can't see past the end of your nose, maybe your sword arm has seen better days. In theory, medieval law sometimes offers exemptions for the halt and the lame. In practice, it's often more about how desperate your lord is and how many bodies he needs to fill his ranks. If you're obviously unable to fight, missing a limb, struggling to walk, or prone to fits, the best-case scenario is being left behind to guard the village. Translation: you look after the chickens, the children, and the elderly, praying that the invading army skips your hut. The worst-case scenario is being sent along anyway, given a sharp stick, and told to make yourself useful. There are stories of people with disabilities fighting heroically from carts, on crutches, or even from behind hastily built barricades. Are they true? Maybe. But they're retold every winter, just in case. For those too unsteady for battle but not quite invisible, there's spiritual duty. You're handed a banner, a cross, or a string of rosary beads and told to pray for the troops. Some call it morale support, others call it keeping you out of harm's way. Either way, your name might go in the parish records as a defender of the faith, even if your main contribution is making sure the priest's cassock doesn't blow away in the wind. Not everyone is so lucky. Some lords are less understanding, and rumours fly about press gangs rounding up anyone who can hold a weapon, regardless of ability. If you're clever, you might fake an injury or exaggerate your real one to stay home. A dramatic cough, a convenient feint, or a suspiciously swollen ankle can mean the difference between wielding a pitchfork in battle or using it to stir the communal stew. On the flip side, medieval chroniclers love a good underdog story. Occasionally, someone with a disability manages to play a heroic role, shouting warnings, rescuing the wounded, or distracting the enemy with a well-timed goat stampede. These stories become village legends, recounted by the fireside until no one's sure how much is true. Some even get immortalized in a ballad or a prayer, though it's rarely sung outside the pub. If you return from war wounded, say minus a hand, an eye, or any reasonable chance at running, your status shifts. You might be pitied, respected, or even envied, depending on how many war stories you can spin and how much free ale you can earn at the tavern. War injuries are worn like medals, and there's a perverse camaraderie among those who bear them, swapping tales of battle scars and how I almost got famous. But the reality is that, for most, warfare is just another way the medieval world sorts people into useful and not so useful. If you can't fight, you make yourself useful in other ways, organizing supplies, helping with repairs, or tending to the wounded. If all else fails, you become part of the home front legend, the one who kept the hearth warm while everyone else chased glory. So while you might not end up in a tapestry, you're still part of the story. In the end, every village needs its defenders, on the field, in the chapel, and by the fire. And if you're the inspiration for a ballad no one remembers the tune to, well, at least you know you survived the chorus. Games, festivals, and religious holidays all come with a side of accessibility problems. But if you're inventive, you'll find ways to enjoy the festivities, sometimes by inventing your own game, sometimes by just heckling the juggler. Medieval entertainment is as homemade as the bread, and just as likely to end up burned around the edges. If you're living with a disability, you quickly discover that fun, like survival, is something you carve out for yourself, sometimes literally, with a stick, a turnip, and a healthy disregard for rules. The medieval field day isn't exactly filled with ADA-compliant activities, but you learn to adapt, laugh, and occasionally cause a little chaos. Let's start with games. Sports in the Middle Ages tend to be rough and tumble affairs. Wrestling, mock battles, chasing a pig around the village green, or hurling stones at an unsuspecting target, usually a barrel, sometimes a relative. If you're not up for full contact mayhem, there's always dice, chess, or who can balance the cheese wheel longest, a game you may have invented on a rainy afternoon out of sheer boredom and a surplus of dairy products. If your hands are steady, you might clean up at cards. If not, you can always claim you're playing for laughs. For the more athletic events, you adapt your own rules. Maybe you race to the bakery instead of around the whole village. Maybe you're the official judge of who can hop on one foot without falling into the duck pond, a competition tailor-made for the physically unpredictable. If you can make people laugh, on purpose or by accident, you're halfway to winning anyway. Festivals are another matter entirely. Crowds, muddy streets, and an abundance of livestock make every celebration a slow-motion obstacle course. But these are also prime times for cleverness. You claim a spot by the fire, swap stories, and challenge the local juggler to a who can catch the fewest apples contest. Spoiler, it's always you, but the audience loves it. Musicians appreciate a listener who claps off, beat, and storytellers rely on you to heckle the villain or cheer the hero. If you can't join the dance, you become the drummer. If you can't march in the parade, you're the parade commentator, louder, wittier, and far more memorable than the band. Religious holidays are a mixed bag. There's usually extra food, which is always a plus, but also more standing, more processions, and more opportunities to trip in front of a bishop. You learn to play to your strengths, volunteering to ring the bell, helping with decorations, or managing the children's games from a safe distance behind a strategically placed pie. Sometimes you're blessed with a front row seat, usually because everyone wants to keep an eye on you. Sometimes you just stake out the softest patch of grass and declare yourself judge of the maypole dance. Who's going to argue? You're the only one with the stamina to sit through the whole thing. In quieter moments, entertainment is homemade. You invent riddles, play spot the rat in the rafters, or try your hand at whittling, creating objects of dubious utility but great sentimental value. On long winter nights, you join in the storytelling, adding dramatic flair or simply correcting the facts when the local bard gets a little too enthusiastic. If you can't hear the story, you make up your own. If you can't see the game board, you let the dog decide the winner. Even chores become competitions if you're clever. Who can shell peas the fastest? Who can balance a mug on their head without spilling? Who can make the goat laugh, or at least not bite anyone for an entire afternoon? If you win, you get bragging rights. If you lose, you invent a new rule. At the end of the day, entertainment in the Middle Ages isn't about what you can't do. It's about what you can. You find your fun in the fumbles, the flukes, and the friendly teasing that makes every mishap a memory. Because when survival itself is sometimes a comedy of errors, you might as well enjoy the show. Disability in the Middle Ages comes with a higher risk of an early end. But the good news? Everyone's obsessed with the afterlife. There's a special place in heaven for people who suffered, assuming you made it past the theology pop quiz. It's not exactly a cheerful topic. But death is everywhere in medieval life, like that persistent smell of cabbage, or the goat who refuses to leave the kitchen. For someone living with a disability, the odds of making it to a ripe old age are stacked against you. Illness, injury, famine, and the occasional outbreak of plague are lurking around every corner, ready to make you a footnote in the local parish records. If you can't run, climb, or wrestle your way out of trouble, you become intimately familiar with the village priest's last rites routine. But fear not, medieval society is positively obsessed with what comes next. The afterlife is more than just a comfort. It's the grand prize at the end of the world's roughest obstacle course. From stained glass windows to sermons that last longer than the average winter, everyone is reminded that there's a heavenly reward for the righteous, especially those who have suffered a little extra on earth. You're told, over and over, that patience in pain, humility in hardship, and the occasional heroic sigh all but guarantee a seat in the celestial VIP section. The preparation for death is an event in itself. The whole family gathers around, the priest is summoned, and the village healer pops in, just in case it's not too late for one more experimental poultice. You're offered everything from holy water to a slice of the special bread saved for emergencies. The dog, sensing something is up, immediately jumps on the bed, adding a few more aches to your collection. If you're lucid, you get to confess your sins. If you're not, the priest shouts extra loud, just in case you can hear him from the other side. There's comfort in the ritual. Candles are lit, prayers are said, and, if you've been especially unlucky in life, people seem to work even harder to make your final moments peaceful. After all, you're considered blessed by suffering. You get extra points in heaven for every blister, bruise, and botched herbal remedy you endured. Some even claim you'll skip the long line at the pearly gates, provided, of course, you remembered to confess that one time you stole the neighbour's pie. For the family, your passing is a bittersweet affair. There's grief, certainly, but also a certain pride in your resilience. Stories are told about your cleverness, your stubbornness, and the time you survived that bout of fever everyone thought was fatal. Your pillow is fluffed, your favourite blanket tucked tight, and if you're lucky, someone sneaks you a sip of the good wine before the priest can object. Funerals are social events, with everyone in their best clothes, meaning fewer holes than usual, plenty of solemn faces, and the occasional child trying to sneak a look at the coffin. If you're famous for your endurance or your wit, there might be a song, a poem, or at least a memorable joke about your ability to fall over without ever spilling your soup. The best part, at least according to every sermon ever preached, is what comes next. Heaven is described in vivid detail, endless feasts, no more aches and pains, and, crucially, not a single goat in the kitchen. You're promised a new, perfected body, freedom from want, and all the saints as your new neighbours. If you made it through a medieval life with disability, you're practically guaranteed front-row seats at the heavenly banquet. So while death comes early and often in the Middle Ages, the promise of something better is always there, shining just beyond the edge of the candlelight. The world may have been rough, but, according to every hopeful face at your bedside, eternity is going to be a lot more forgiving, and who knows? Maybe you'll finally win that foot race in paradise. No splinters, no limps, and not a single theology quiz in sight. How will you be remembered? As a tragic tale, a local legend, or the person who managed to survive medieval life with only one working knee and a surprisingly good sense of humour? If you're lucky, they'll name a soup after you. In the Middle Ages, legacy is everything. There's no social media feed to keep your memory alive, just word of mouth, the village storyteller, and that one neighbour who never quite remembers the details but always tells the story anyway. For someone living with a disability, legacy is a coin with three sides: pity, admiration, and sheer bewilderment. Let's start with the tragic tale. If your life has been marked by hardship, say you lost a limb to an angry pig or spent years outsmarting every illness the Middle Ages could throw at you, people love to recount your struggles. You become the cautionary story mothers tell their children. Finish your pottage, or you'll end up like poor old Marta, who never ran fast but always had a clever way to sneak the last turnip. Your difficulties are turned into lessons about fate, fortune, and the will of God, wrapped in a layer of sympathy that's equal parts genuine and performative. But pity isn't the whole story. The same challenges that make you the subject of sad songs can turn you into a local legend. Maybe you learned to out-limp the baker's dog, or became famous for your unbeatable chicken stew. Your life becomes folklore, each retelling a little grander than the last. You're the one who once walked to the next village in a blizzard with just a stick and a prayer, or the first to invent the great goose avoidance dance. People ask after your wisdom, recount your witticisms, and claim you blessed their turnip patch with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a muttered complaint about the mud. And then, of course, there's sainthood. In an age obsessed with miracles, suffering can be spun as proof of divine favor. Maybe you were patient through every hardship, never complained, at least not too loudly, or became known for your endless prayers and stoic endurance. Someone writes down the tale of how you once cured a child's fever with a single touch, or predicted the coming storm with an aching knee. The village priest might nominate you for beatification, but even if Rome never hears your name, you become the local saint, complete with rumors, relics, and the occasional candle lit in your honor. And if you're neither tragic nor particularly holy, there's always the root of that one guy. The person who became a fixture in everyone's story, always there, always game, and always ready with a dry remark. Maybe you were the best at finding mushrooms, or maybe you were the worst at keeping sheep in a straight line. But no village festival or fireside tale is complete without a mention of your misadventures. Your memory lingers in the jokes, the gossip, and the slightly lopsided wooden spoon someone swears you carved during the winter of that terrible cough. Sometimes your legacy is practical. You pass down recipes, tricks for mending clothes with one good hand, or the secret to convincing the church dog to leave you alone. Children who never met you grow up hearing about your feats and foibles. Maybe you taught your family to laugh at trouble, to stick together when times were hard, and to find pride in surviving, however crookedly, another season. If you're very lucky, you'll leave behind something tangible, a walking stick that becomes a family heirloom, a patch of garden that always grows the best onions, or a soup recipe so infamous they still talk about it in the next parish. Maybe there's a bench by the fire everyone calls yours, or a song that no one else can quite sing the way you did. In the end, your legacy is the sum of stories, laughter, and stubbornness that echo long after you're gone. In the Middle Ages, survival itself is a triumph, and anyone who made it with wit, warmth, and only a few splinters deserves to be remembered. So here's to you, hero, legend, that one guy, and to the soup they'll still be naming after you when the rest of us are just a footnote in the village chronicle. You want steady work, but the local blacksmiths guild isn't exactly handing out applications to people who can't swing a hammer. Medieval guilds are all about tradition, suspicious handshakes, and minimum physical requirements like must be able to survive a Tuesday. If you're lucky, you'll land a job no one else wants, like rat wrangler or professional bell ringer. At least you won't be bored. Guilds are the backbone of the medieval working world, powerful, proud, and suspicious of anything that looks like innovation, weakness, or a limp. Each trade, from weaving to butchery to brewing, has its own little club, complete with elaborate initiation rituals, secret passwords, and a healthy fear of outsiders, including sometimes people from the next street over. If you want a stable income, a hot meal, or the right to wear a snazzy apron, you have to play by the guild's rules, which often means passing a basic fitness test that would defeat most modern office workers before their first cup of coffee. If you're living with a disability, the road into a guild is as bumpy as a medieval road after a thunderstorm. Some guilds are more forgiving than others. The Scribes Guild might look the other way if you squint or stutter, as long as you can still copy texts with a steady hand. The bakers might tolerate a limp, so long as you don't trip into the dough. But jobs requiring strength, stamina, and a full set of functioning limbs, blacksmith, carpenter, stonemason, are closed shops. If you can't wield a hammer, saw a plank, or haul a sack of grain, you're politely, or not so politely, encouraged to seek your fortune elsewhere. Still, medieval life is nothing if not adaptable. If you're clever, patient, or just have a knack for avoiding disaster, you might find a niche. Some guilds always have need for the less glamorous jobs. Rat wrangler, if you're fast with a stick and don't mind the company. Bell ringer, if you can sit and pull. Or official town crier, provided your voice is loud and your conscience is quiet. Every guild has tasks no one else wants. Cleaning tools, keeping accounts, sharpening knives, and if you can make yourself indispensable, you might just find a place in the pecking order. Sometimes, being different becomes your ticket in. Maybe you have a way with animals because you know what it's like to be underestimated. Maybe your unique perspective, translation, you see the world sideways thanks to a crooked neck, helps you notice things others miss. You could become the local taster for suspicious food, the one trusted to test out new locks, or the lucky charm invited to every guild feast to keep away bad omens. If you survive long enough, you may even earn an honorary title, assistant to the apprentice's apprentice. It's not glamorous, but at least you get to sit down sometimes. Of course, there's always the option of self-employment. If the guilds won't have you, maybe the market will. You become a street performer, a storyteller, a mender of pots, or a wandering seller of whatever you can carry or convince someone else to carry for you. Every medieval town has its unofficial workforce, the fixers, the finders, the ones who know how to stretch a penny and a meal. It's not secure, but it's yours. And let's not forget charity work, or jobs created by the village just to keep everyone busy. Supervising children, counting chickens, or chasing the geese out of the churchyard, all necessary tasks, and all perfect for someone the guilds overlooked. If you're extra persuasive, you can even convince the local council to create a new role. Town complainer, official seat warmer, or expert at finding lost sheep. So, while you might never rise to master of the blacksmiths or head of the brewers, you carve out a role that's all your own. In a world built on tradition and suspicion, being the medieval diversity hire isn't so bad. At least you're guaranteed a story at every guild feast, and maybe, just maybe, they'll name a special handshake after you. In the Middle Ages, there's no such thing as a special needs class. If you're a kid with a disability, you get tossed in with the goats and told to keep up, literally. Childhood is mostly survival, minor bullying, and learning to dodge flying turnips in the schoolyard. If you make it to adulthood, congratulations, you're a local legend, and possibly the patron saint of stubbed toes. From your very first wobbly step, you're thrown into the deep end. Sometimes literally, if the village pond is close by, and older siblings are feeling mischievous. There are no accommodations, no IEPs, and definitely no helpful pamphlets from the local abbey about inclusive play. If you're born with a limp, a twisted arm, or a tendency to fall over every third step, the village immediately divides into two groups, the ones who try to help and the ones who can't resist a good laugh at your expense. Childhood in the Middle Ages is one big obstacle course. The ground is a mess of rocks, mud, and uneven steps. If you walk with a crutch or drag yourself after the other children, you learn quickly which routes are safest and which puddles are deeper than they look. There's no child-proofing. The fireplace is hot, the well is deep, and the chickens bite. You become the family's best early warning system, able to detect danger by the sound of approaching hoofbeats or the cackling of an irate goose. School, if it exists, is a ramshackle affair, part church, part barn, part whatever space the local priest isn't using for storing onions. Lessons are loud and physical. If you can't write with a quill, you're handed a stick and told to draw your letters in the dirt. Reading is a luxury, and discipline involves dodging flying turnips or a gentle whack from the priest's stick, sometimes both at once for efficiency. If you lag behind in lessons, someone will sigh, cross themselves, and declare it a test of your patience or the teacher's. Friends come in surprising forms. Sometimes the other children help you climb the wall or bring you a chunk of bread at lunchtime. Sometimes they dare you to race the pigs, then laugh when you trip. If you can turn your falls into slapstick comedy, you'll find yourself surrounded by fans. If you're thin-skinned, you learn resilience fast, or you cultivate the art of well-timed sarcasm. Work starts early for everyone, and your ability to pitch in determines how much sympathy you get. Can't herd the geese? You're assigned to watch the gate. Too slow to fetch water? You're sent to shell peas with grandma, who's not above using your limp as a backrest. There's a rough justice to these arrangements. If you're useful, you're loved. If not, you're tolerated. And occasionally, someone will slip you an extra bit of cheese for effort. Every medieval childhood is tinged with risk, but a child with a disability faces even more. Fevers, accidents, and the general hazards of life in a place where the doctor's idea of medicine is try not to die. The local wise woman offers charms and dubious advice, while your parents alternate between fierce protectiveness and cheerful let them learn philosophy. If you make it to adolescence, you're celebrated, if only because nobody expected you to survive past your first bout of chicken pox. If you're really lucky, you become a kind of mascot, invited to join in festivals, asked to judge the village cheese contest, and maybe even used as a good luck charm during the harvest. Your limp, your lisp, or your uncooperative hand becomes part of your legend. You're the kid who survived the winter cough, who always has a joke, and who can outstare the priest when he lectures the class. So medieval childhood, for all its rough edges, is a lesson in adaptation. You don't get much sympathy, but you do get a crash course in grit, wit, and the fine art of not letting anyone see you cry. Make it to adulthood, and you're more than just a survivor. You're a bona fide legend, with stories that will be told long after the last turnip has been thrown. Medieval festivals are basically a combination of county fair, spiritual boot camp, and public endurance trial. If you can't stand for hours or walk in a parade, good luck seeing the action from anywhere but the back row, right behind the world's tallest monk. Still, there's usually a pie to be had if you can reach it before the village dogs. Festivals in the Middle Ages are the highlight of the calendar, a much-needed break from the daily grind of mud, livestock, and questionable pottage. Every saint's feast, harvest, celebration, or royal birthday is an excuse for the village to pull out all the stops, colourful banners, crowded streets, and the kind of communal revelry that leaves everyone with a story or a bruise. But if you're living with a disability, every festival is a test of patience, determination, and strategic pie acquisition. First up, parades. These are the centerpiece of every festival, snaking through the village square and down the main road. Ideally, you'd march alongside everyone else, but if your legs have other ideas, you're left to watch from the sidelines. Of course, the sidelines means jostling for space with the elderly, the toddlers, and the sheep that have wandered into the crowd in search of dropped snacks. If you're unlucky, your only view is the back of Brother Gregory's habit, a wall of wool and incense that blocks out the sun and any chance of seeing the jugglers. Standing for hours is a medieval endurance sport. If you can't stand, you sit. If you can't sit on the hard ground, you find a barrel, a fence, or a friendly lap negotiated in advance, ideally. The best seats, close to the action, are claimed early by families with picnic baskets or by the local dignitary who arrives with his own chair. Your job is to look as pitiable or as charming as possible and hope someone offers you a spot, or at least a better view than parade feet. Games and contests are everywhere. Maypole dancing, sack races, mock jousts, and the infamous greased pig chase. These are designed for the nimble, the sturdy, and the wildly optimistic. If you're not competing, you're spectating, and if you're creative, you're organizing your own event. Fastest to finish a pie with one hand, best story about why you're not running, or loudest cheer for other people's children. You become the festival's unofficial commentator, adding running jokes and sharp observations as the day wears on. Food is, of course, the heart of every celebration. Trays of pies, baskets of bread, and flagons of ale make their way through the crowd, each with a 50-50 chance of actually reaching their intended target. If you can't fight your way to the front, You rely on family, friends, or a very persuasive glare to bring you a treat before the dogs do. Occasionally, you catch a break. A sympathetic neighbor or a distracted monk slips you an extra pasty, and for a moment, you're the happiest and fullest person at the fair. Religious ceremonies, which bookend every festival, are their own accessibility challenge. Masses run long, incense clouds the air, and the hard church benches do no favors for aching joints. If you can't kneel, you stand. If you can't stand, you lean. If you can't do either, you offer up your suffering as an extra prayer and hope God is paying attention. The processions can last for hours, winding through uneven streets and up church steps that feel like they were built for mountain goats. But for every inconvenience, there's a small moment of comfort, a neighbor steadying your elbow, a stranger offering a seat, or the priest giving you a wink as you quietly munch a smuggled tart in the back row. Despite the challenges, festivals are a chance to belong. Laughter and music fill the air, and for once, everyone's differences are part of the patchwork. You swap stories, join in the singing, and cheer on your favorites, content in the knowledge that, while you might not win the sack race, you definitely win for best improvised seat and cleverest snack strategy. So, as the sun sets and the festival winds down, you limp, hobble, or get carried home, full of food and stories. In the Middle Ages, accessibility might be a dream, but finding joy, now, that's a skill you've mastered, one pie at a time. So tonight, as you sink deeper into your very modern bed, a bed with springs, memory foam, and, I sincerely hope, not a single flea, maybe spare a thought for those who came before. People who faced the Middle Ages with one good leg, half their hearing, a wooden hand, or just a whole lot of stubbornness and grit. People who survived in a world with no elevators, no prescriptions, and zero tolerance for complaining about the weather. You've just made it through a day in medieval Europe with a disability, a day that started with a suspicious glance from the neighbours and ended with a dinner that was 70% turnip and 30% existential dread. You've outwitted nosy priests, sidestepped suspicious livestock, and navigated a legal system where reasonable accommodation meant being allowed to sleep near the fire instead of the drafty door. Sure, it wasn't easy. You were pitied, prayed over, occasionally blamed for the local crop failure, and maybe even nominated for sainthood if you were lucky or unlucky, depending on your thoughts about crowds and incense. Your cane was a stick, your doctor was a barber with a bowl, and your emotional support animal was that one dog that bit everyone except you. But here's the thing, people like you survived. They found workarounds, invented new ways to get by, built support networks of family, faith, and the occasional goose. They kept their humour and their humanity, even when the world seemed determined to give them as little of both as possible. So as you drift off tonight, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the millions who didn't get ramps, or subtitles, or working plumbing, but somehow kept going anyway. Remember, history is full of people who were told no, and responded with, "Just watch me." Because the truth is, surviving the past took more than luck. It took resilience, creativity, and a willingness to laugh at the absurdity of it all. So, good night, modern survivor. May your dreams be free of medieval bureaucracy, unlicensed barbers, and goats with opinions. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, just be glad you're not stepping barefoot into a medieval chamber pot. Sleep well. You've earned it.